Okay, well, good morning, everybody. My name is Mahr. I am the superintendent of the Mormon Pioneer National Historic Trail, and I'm really grateful to be able to join you today. Unfortunately, I'm joining by Zoom. I'm joining remotely. That would not be the preferred way to participate in this great conference, but because of federal travel regulations, I'm joining you today from the campus of the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque. And our offices are located in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and in Salt Lake City, Utah. And as soon as we can get the presentation up, we will, I'll move forward. There we go. Thank you so much. And am I going to have driving capability here?
Please repeat that.
Will I have capability to drive here, or are you going to advance for me?
You will not have a capability to drive unless you share from your computer.
Okay, I'm just going to ask you to forward to the next slide then, please.
Yep, that's fine.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. My purpose today is I'm going to be speaking about the Mormon Pioneer National Historic Trail. And as a component of the National Trail System, the Mormon Pioneer National Historic Trail was established by the U.S. Congress in 1978 as one of the first National Historic Trails in the United States. So it's pretty notable for that reason. It is administered by the National Park Service, and as you'll see through the course of this presentation, our primary role here is going to be to encourage people to get out on the trail, to experience this valuable component of American history, and to experience on the ground, to experience the power of place, to experience traveling along the route that the original trail travelers traveled in 1846 and 1847. And that route includes 1,300 miles of trail from Nauvoo to Salt Lake City. And of course, it commemorates the 1846 to 1847 journey of the Mormon people from Nauvoo to Salt Lake Valley. Next slide, please. So you see the trail here. As you know, it began in Nauvoo, as Professor Bennett just explained, and goes through southern Iowa, and crosses the Mississippi there at Council Bluffs, and goes across Nebraska, across Wyoming, following the Great Platte River Road into Wyoming, and then drops into Salt Lake City, the Salt Lake Valley. So it's 1,300 miles of trail spanning from Illinois to Utah. Next slide, please. So if we focus on the trail in Iowa, which is one of the most compelling parts of the entire trail, you see here that includes 317 miles. And I've shown the designated route, which you see hopefully in that kind of purple color there. But I've also included some of the routes that have been determined to be eligible to be added to the National Historic Trail. We studied these additional routes back in 2009 and recommended to Congress that these would be eligible for addition to the National Historic Trail, because the National Historic Trail, as it exists now, follows the route of Brigham Young's early party in early 1846 to reach Council Bluffs. But the majority of LDS travelers following in Brigham Young's example took these other routes that went a little bit north of the Missouri communities. So we've identified that these are eligible routes and are important routes to the story of the pioneering effort in 1846 and 1847. Next slide, please. So what I'm going to focus on for the rest of my presentation is going to be our web page and really providing opportunities, different opportunities for people to get on the trail, to get outside and to experience the trail, to experience specific locations along the trail, but also the trail corridor. So you can get in your car and you can drive to drive to trail sites, or hopefully at times be able to get out of the car and walk on the trail itself. So have that really compelling experience of coming as close as you can to what those original trail travelers felt in 1846 and early 1847. As you'll see, there are digital resources, there are printed resources, and there are on-the-ground resources that are going to help you to experience the trail. And all of it begins with the web page. I really want to make you aware of this, that there is a web page from the National Park Service that collects all of this information to help guide your traveling experience along the trail. And that is, as you see highlighted here, nps.gov/MOPI, which is short for Mormon Pioneer. Next slide, please. So if you go to the web page, one of the first things you're going to see is you can link to is a places to go page, and it's an interactive and a very informative page that gives you a map of the trail. In this case, a map through the trail through Iowa, and it's very interactive, so that you see in this kind of large format that it highlights sites across the state. There are approximately 24 sites that you can visit and actually get on the ground and experience the trail. And as you focus into each of these sites, the map expands, so you can get closer in and see exactly where these sites are. And you can actually hit on each of the sites, and information will come up that will explain how to access the site, how to get there, and then the significance of the site, and then also provide you with additional links for additional information. In many cases, some of these sites have their own web pages, and this will interactively link you to those home pages. And here are just a couple of examples. If we go to the next slide, you see Garden Grove, and there's some information there, and there's additional links to get to the story as it's told by the site stewards themselves. Next slide, please. The Mount Pisgah site, another critical feature of the experience of the original saints as they came through the state. You can see there's information on how to get there, and then how to link to additional information, history, and access information about the site. And next slide, please. Richardson Point, of course, another really significant site in eastern Iowa, and the same kind of information, access information, location information, and you can link to more historical information about the site. So next slide, please. So another feature that you can access is the National Historic Trail Viewer. And this is a really sophisticated piece of technology that has created the National Historic Trail in GIS, in Geographic Information System format. It's very sophisticated. It's meant to be interactive, so you can focus into the trail, you can focus out, and you can see the latest information, because we try and update this frequently, and I'll explain a little bit more about that in just a second. But this is probably your best source for finding the most up-to-date information on where the trail is. And the information here has been collected at the initially at the 1 to 100,000 scale. So in many cases, it represents a corridor, but we tend to update it based on very, very detailed and accurate information. So if that moves the line at all, then that reflects a most recent update. And that can be followed across the entire trail, not just in Iowa, but across the entire trail. So you have that ability to get down to rather very specific scales to see where the trail is located in a particular county or community. And I should note here, it's very important to understand that that if you are following the trail, you probably are not going to be able to get on the actual footsteps Unless those locations have been open for public access. The majority of the trail, primarily in Illinois, or I'm sorry, in Iowa, goes through private property, and we absolutely maintain private property rights. The National Park Service does not own any land of the trail in Iowa, so it's not public access unless those areas where it's clearly marked for public access. So if you are interested in following the trail and it does go through private property, you would have to contact the private property owner. So that's a strong caveat that we need to include with all this. But at the same time, it's important the public knows where the trail is. And in those areas where you can access it through public rights of way, such as roads, you'll have that opportunity to do it. Next slide, please. So there's a lot of printed material that you can also use to follow the trail. And as I'll show here in the next couple of slides, we have auto true route interpretive guides, and we have what you would always see at a National Park Service site, a map and a guide that opens up, tells you the history of a park and a map of the park. And the Mormon Pioneer National Historic Trail has the same feature. We've developed a wonderful brochure that is actually being updated right now, and we hope to have that out to the public, an updated and revised version in the next year or so. But the current version is a wonderful way to help visit the trail. Next slide, please. And you see here, this is the back of the guide. It has a complete map, and it displays many of the sites, has information about how to visit the sites and how to follow the trail. Next slide, please. And I mentioned the auto true route guides, and these are wonderful, wonderful set of guides that are available at no cost from us, that include historical reviews, and then identify each site that has public access for the public to join experience and stand on those footsteps. And in some cases, there are interpretive sites. In some cases, there are historic sites. In some cases, there are museums or visitor centers. But all of these contribute to that general experience of traveling across the trail in Iowa. We've developed interpretive guides for each of the states that the trail passes through. But the Iowa guide was the first one we completed well over a decade ago, and we update it constantly. And as you see up in the left-hand corner there, we also have a map that's included in the guide, so yet another resource to help you follow the trail. Next slide, please. So on the ground, you'll also see signing that identifies the route of the trail, so that if you're driving down a state highway, it's likely you might see trail signs that will provide you with actual confirmation you're on the route of the National Historic Trail. We use the historic route to show when you're actually on or overlaying the actual trail. We have crossing signs that show where the historic route might cross a state highway. We have site identification signs, and we have directional signing, so that you will actually see confirmation of the trail on public rights of way. And that's another important way for people to recognize and to experience the trail, to know that they're on the trail and they're having that experience of driving down a route that has tremendous historical significance, national significance. Next slide, please. We also have sets of pedestrian signs, so that if we develop actual route on the ground in those precious areas where there's actually public access to follow the trail through farm fields or through forests or river crossings, we've developed signs that can be used for pedestrians to follow the trail. And I should point out there is a logo that marks the National Historic Trail. You see it there, Mormon Pioneer National Historic Trail logo. It's a logo that's approved by the National Park Service to be used across the trail, and it provides the public with that touchstone to know that they're on the trail and that they're on authentic pieces of the trail. Next slide, please. There's just a couple of examples of the trail signs in use. You can see the sign there for Richardson Point. We've used this on many other trails around the country. We have not used it that much on the Mohr and Pioneer Trail because we're still working with communities to sign the trail. But you see examples of how this is used across the country and how much wonderful ownership the community takes over signing their components of the trail through their county or their community, and how this really does help visibility for the trail and recognition of the trail. And I'd point your attention up to the illustration on the upper right-hand corner. This happens to be for the Trail of Tears. That's a site down in Arkansas. And it's a mile marker. It's a wonderful mile marker that identifies the trail, but then also shows where you are on the trail. In this case, it shows the beginning of the trail in Tennessee and the end of the trail in Oklahoma, so many miles in each direction. So it gives visitors that real sense of journey, of origin and destination. And these types of signs placed at historic sites along the trail are tremendously compelling and draw people. And as you can see, Miss Cherokee there on the Trail of Tears, this was a place that they wanted to come to and identify places that their ancestors traveled through. So we hope to do the same thing on the Mohr and Pioneer Trail in Iowa, is to provide that sense of journey, of origin and destination. Next slide, please. So I'll shift a little bit here and just to say how this process is ongoing, because our goal in the National Park Service is to provide the American public with opportunities to interact with and to experience authentic trail resources. And those resources are the stories, the sites, and the segments on the trail. And that work continues in the search of authentic trail experiences. And I'll just quickly go over some of the activity that we're involved with. Next slide, please. We're constantly looking for where the trail is, and we talk to knowledgeable historians, people like you who are really embedded in the local history of the trail and the community, knowledgeable individuals. We review historical documentation for corroboration of sites and segments of the trail. We consult with historic journals, historic maps like the GLO maps, and we do archaeological inventories. Next slide, please. We're really fortunate to have the use of modern technology to follow trail segments and identify new trail segments. We use light detection LiDAR. That's what LiDAR is. It's remote sensing. It's light detection and ranging, which you see kind of in the middle slide there on the right-hand slide. It's highly technical, but it really provides us with wonderful views of what the historic route is. We can actually see indentations on the ground from LiDAR imagery. We use high-resolution imagery also from overhead flights and from satellite flights. And also historic aerial photographs are really valuable because they tend to show us, particularly in photos from the 30s and the 40s and 50s, what the landscape looked like before urban development or before agricultural development. And using all of these sources to corroborate each other, we're able to identify where the historic route is so that we can really focus on that level of authenticity and then work on how we can make it available to the public. Next slide, please. We also pursue a lot of archaeological research to ground truth the information that we found. So much of the trail in Iowa is on private property, so we try and do non-intrusive work. And here you see examples of that. This is ground penetrating radar that's used to identify and corroborate site identification. We've done a lot of work at Garden Grove, at the Mount Pisgah settlement, and at 7 Mile Creek settlement. So that's another component we use. And then finally, and this is the last slide, next slide, please. Right now, we have researchers in the field that are investigating the remnants of the built environment from 1846 and 1847. And that's a real critical component of of trying to provide people with that experience on the ground. Because as you travel across the trail, you have the landscape. In some cases, you might have elements of the trail still existent. And you have sites that you can visit that may or may not have extant resources there. But if we can find buildings, remnants of the built environment that are still there, that enhances people's experiences of traveling along the trail. Some of these structures have direct relationship to the saints traveling through Iowa. Some of them were built at particular campsites or settlement sites to wait out the winter. But others were simply there and are called what we call witness structures that saw the saints pass along the trail, and they're still there. So that if you're traveling today, you just get that one additional contributing factor of where the trail is, what the trail is, and it helps you to experience the trails that much more. And as you can see from this picture, the structures are in many there are many locations. There are about 22 that we've identified in Iowa, and they're in many different conditions. So, you know, the need for assistance to preserve these sites and to continue to identify them and to make the public aware of them is quite evident. And so that's the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for listening and joining this morning.